A proactive course design. The following digital short will explain how teaching environments, delivery formats, and temporal modalities influence accessible and inclusive student learning. The video will provide a breakdown of how to conceptualize the learning environment as it pertains to online literacy instruction. The video will explain how temporal modalities frame student engagement with online literacy instruction and the barriers to access that need to be addressed in order to develop a more robust pedagogical framework for accessibility and inclusivity. The video will also lay out the universal design of learning principles that I integrated into my online asynchronous course, my general policy considerations, as well as the learning management system. Usability and accessibility. Pengilly 2021 work and course outline integrating Borgman and McArdle 2019 PARS model provides a structure to present my own asynchronous online writing course. The authors write that the PARS model includes the elements of personal, accessible, responsive, and strategic. These ideas are presented through a list of practical manifestations within a pedagogical context, including usability, readability, accessibility, and universal design. The authors begin with the idea of a strategic approach to course design. Writing accessibility is easier to achieve when it is strategically incorporated into the course at the initial design phase. The accessibility component of this strategic decision incorporates both the structural issues in a course alongside accessible content. The strategic structural approach begins with the Learning Management System, LMS, specifically Canvas, in which the author took great care to use structured headings, captions, alternate text images, and varied activities to attend to multiple learning styles. This approach also incorporates multiple types of student-instructor interaction by providing both written and audio feedback, video lectures, and a required one-on-one conference. There was both a pre-planned structure in terms of assignment and accessibility through opportunities for optional group work, integration of multiple learning styles, examples of student work for each major assignment, and theme discussion activities about accessibility and confronting ableist structure. Another component of the strategic structural considerations was the leveraging of tools available on the Canvas LMS, including Panopto, Blackboard Ally, Adobe Acrobat Reader, and Microsoft Word. Usability and accessibility are very large components of what I'm trying to accomplish with this asynchronous online writing course. And so what I want to kind of walk you through is how I integrate a lot of these ideas within a specific module or towards the development of a specific project. So a series of tasks and assignments that build to one specific multimodal project. This begins with, again, the principles of usability and accessibility. So taking that PARS model, making sure that the work is personal, accessible, responsible, and strategic. And everything for my course is built through the Canvas module. So prior to getting to the second project, they've already gone through a very meticulously designed Canvas experience where they begin with resources and then each of the modules within Canvas builds into the next module. Each of the smaller steps builds into the larger steps. So they get the project 2, and now they are moving from a traditional essay into making what I call a digital short, which I define as a short form documentary. So they're making a film, but it's academic in nature, and they're leveraging the academic writing and research from Project 1 to write the script for Project 2, to develop the visual narrative that will accompany the script, and then to assemble it all together. So when we're thinking about the accessibility component of that, when we're thinking about the usability, we also have to remember that there are two things happening with the multimodal project. First and foremost, they are experiencing an academic assignment that they might not have experienced before, one that requires specific technological capabilities. And in that capacity, a lot of the work that I'm doing is not just academic discourse. but it's technical composition skills would be the best way to put it. So in the literature review, you're writing with traditional composition skills. In the digital short, you're developing technical composition skills, and they overlap. And the idea that like you can use claim, evidence, and analysis to write an academic paper, you could use it to write a script, especially an academic-based script like a short-form documentary. So there's still composition skills, but now they're entering into a multimodal realm. So ensuring that Canvas is communicating ideas like structured headings, captions, alternate text for images, a variety of activities for multiple audiences. Now the baseline is multimodal, right? So like the sample assignments or resources that I give, they're short video clips, or they're news segments, or they're other documentaries and academic discourse in video form, right? And so in that capacity, the alternative then becomes perhaps more traditional text or audio only, right? Whereas when I'm thinking of those accessibility, variables for traditional text, I'm trying to turn film and bring multimedia in to enhance that, the multiple learning styles. The other aspect of the assignment is that, again, I want to centralize everything for the technical support, because again, it's not that you've never made a film before. Yeah. And again, like that's why I kind of preface it. Like a lot of students haven't made a film based on an academic subject within an academic context, but they're making films every day. So how do you connect, right? Because they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, all digital media platforms, even things like Twitter or Facebook, Reddit, they're heavily integrated with digital short, with film, with digital media. So how do we make those seams evident to the student so that they can leverage what they inherently do in their social media circles, in their personal life, in this academic context as well too? And so part of that is leveraging all of the resources that Canvas has to offer. So if we look at, the two modules that make up project two, the multimodal project or the digital short, I'm able to integrate first and foremost documentaries from the library. I'm able, and I have two primary documentaries for this class. It's a big anti-racist, anti-fascist reading structure and framework to unpack academic discourse. So, we read a lot of anti-fascist work from World War II, like Dorothy Thompson and Bertolt Brecht. We read a lot of anti-racist work by, Ibram X. Kendi, and, we do a lot of anti-racist research. And then we get to project two, and now we're watching films about that. So, Nazi Town is about the rise of the Nazi Party in the United States. Propaganda, The Art of Selling Lies is talking about the role of propaganda within, media, but in a larger extent, authoritarian, totalitarian structures and societies of civilization. I can also integrate additional lecture videos to help them contextualize communication through digital media. And, for this class, they're also happen to be working on a professional portfolio. So one of the videos that they'll make is a video resume, which is a little bit practice of video activity before they actually get into producing the script into a film. Another thing that Canvas really does in terms of that usability, right? And trying to make the whole film production accessible on Canvas. That's the other idea here. For production is a resource where I've sort of like centralized digital media software to help with editing, and also add-ons to Mozilla or Chrome that will help with the editing of video and media. And then they also have access to a resource, and that's more developing the script and developing the film. They also have a resource titled 6 Publishing. And again, Canvas gives you these lecture pages that are like web pages. So I can embed steps, I can embed resources, I can embed visuals to show them how to actually assemble the film, to connect them with open source, non-copyright software to help with audio recording or video recording, things like that as well too. So it's not just about establishing the guidelines and the steps for development. It's also connecting them with all of the resources. And because Canvas, the learning management system, is very interactive, you can really leverage that to appeal to a lot of different learning styles. So you can watch the videos that walk you through this. You can get into the lecture pages. There's transcription software that's integrated with Canvas as well too, that will help bridge that as well. And then making it all accessible on there, and you can download it, you can copy and paste it, you can open it up into different browsers and engage additional softwares of accessibility, because all of that information is here. It's not like proprietary to the instructor. Intersectionality and interdependence. Gonzalez and Butler 2020 write, multimodality has been identified as one potential avenue for working toward accessible pedagogies, specifically by recognizing that communicative practices are fluid, emergent, always in flux, and that therefore students should be encouraged to write through various modalities that reflect the flexibility of contemporary communicative practices. The authors continue that, from a disability studies perspective, scholars also acknowledge the value of multimodality while simultaneously highlighting how multimodal writing should be accessible and inclusive. To achieve this union of disability studies and multimodality in writing instruction, the authors propose an intersectional and interdependence critical framework. They argue writing teachers can incorporate social justice accessibility in their classroom through an intersectional, interdependent framework that factors language, race, sexuality, class, gender, and ability, and their interlocking impacts on learning experience. Among the number of academics cited in the work, the authors begin with the seminal research and writings of Kimberly Crenshaw, arguing that intersectionality is critical to developing and practicing social justice pedagogies, specifically so that teachers can account for multiple levels of marginalization, both when developing their own classroom practices and when working with students. Gonzalez and Butler 2020 also pull from the modern schools of sociolinguistics. The authors note that accounting for markers of marginalization in isolation, i.e., considering language without accounting for race or disability, not only prevents teachers from recognizing the multiple intersecting identities present in and beyond the classrooms, but also makes the teachers complicit in oppression by failing to recognize the interconnected nature of students' histories, experiences, communication practices, and abilities. The authors write of interdependence that it enables teachers to recognize how privilege functions across multiple spaces in and beyond the classroom, drawing attention to the fact that our classrooms are interdependent learning spaces reliant on the interrelation between students, teachers, and their various relations and connections. Additionally, the authors note of the relationship between intersectionality and interdependence. They promote the benefit of accessing and communicating through multiple differences in our classrooms and our societies. One way that I try to integrate accessibility into my pedagogy, and like Gonzalez and Butler write, recognizing that communicative practices are fluid, emergent, always in flux, and that therefore students should be encouraged to write through various modalities that reflect the flexibility of contemporary communicative practices, is the usage of things like templates. Norton put out a work a while ago called They Say, I Say, which is heavily based on the principle of templates, but templates have been around for a long time. They are a teaching device and strategy that allows for students to take professional academic structure, and really a structure. It's sort of like the structure of what will become the finalized syntax, right? And within that structure, alter it and edit it within their own voice. So it's sort of like a start, right? When you are trying to get from one point to the other and you use a map, it's giving you a structure. I mean, you could go and try to figure out yourself, right? Like you can get a compass and navigate the stars and the foliage and the ecology and the sun and the moon and all those things. Like you can use these to kind of find your way, right? Like it's like a wayfinder. But the map provides you with a specific structure that really gets you from that point A to point B, right? But it's a map, so there are options. You can go in different routes. You don't have to go through one specific space, right? So it gives you a structure, and there's always an ideal way to follow that structure, but ultimately, it's open as well too, because the map is a reflection of that open world, that open existence. And so the digital script is really the center of gravity of the film. And again, I talk about the multimodal project, the digital short, in a lot of language of filmmaking. So talking about pre-production, production, and post-production, right? Like anyone who's familiar with film understands those are like the three parts of all filmmaking. In pre-production, that's where you're planning everything. You're getting all the technology, you're setting up the scenes, you're getting the actors in training and running through lines, you're booking the location, you're getting catered, like you're doing everything to get the production ready to run. And then production is, okay, the camera is rolling. And now everything is coming together and coalescing. And you are recording the film, you are producing, you're making the film, right? Like the actors are happening, or you're interviewing the subject, or what have you. And then once production is done, there's another side of that. There's post-production. And that's a very powerful aspect of filmmaking, because a lot of decisions on what ultimately is put forward is made in that post-production. Even though the pre-production is very meticulous and from the outset controls a lot, and the production is the thing in itself, all three are vital parts of that whole process. And, we talk about that a lot in terms of like traditional writing, right? Like we do research, pre-writing, brainstorming, then we do our drafting. And then on the other side of that, we do the revising and editing to get to the final draft. So we're already starting to think through that process. When we're thinking about sort of the fluid nature of multimodal composition and the idea of intersectionality within that capacity, that's one of the things that I like about the script, is that it allows for the student to enter into this structure and develop claims, to bring in evidence in a slightly different way than the traditional, and then obviously to leverage that with analysis as well too. And one of the things that we're doing within that process is that they're taking the language and literacy that they developed within the first project and then reformulating it into a narrative. So for one, there's a shift from the clunky and expositional academic discourse of the literature review to much more storytelling. And then second, they have that option through ideas like rhetorical genre, audience, obviously the visual narrative and the audio narrative, to make those decisions on how they want the film to unfold, but also recognizing that they're making a film, right? So they're in the pre-production when they're writing the script. And so it's hard to see the film when you're brainstorming. But once you start looking at this as a film writer, and you're looking at the script as like scene by scene, and we really call it section by section, but it's sort of like scene by scene, right? Now they're starting to think how this will translate into a film structure as well too. And because it does have both an intended design, right, in terms of that usability and accessibility, but it also allows it to be malleable to the different subjects, research interests, quality of resources, and then ultimately, the different decisions that they make for the film. So the rhetorical genre, the intended audience, things like that. The final script is going to look very different for each student, even though from the beginning, they can see through this structure where they're going. And again, what we're trying to do from a disability study perspective, right, is to create a critical framework through film. And because this structure is really kind of emulating the literature review, it allows for a more seamless transition of that, academic peer-reviewed research and writing to become more of a story. Now, again, it's framed through the stakeholders' viewpoint. So the stakeholder is the central character, but they're having that discussion by connecting back to those original resources, to that original artifact in the literature review. Open media assignments. Orchard et al. 2024 provide an important observation on the use of multimodality within education. Creativity is central to the design of multimodal assignments. The authors continue, as educational spaces, including writing classes, are becoming more standardized and subject to top-down administration, multimodal composing itself emphasizes creativity in various forms while potentially still fulfilling more traditional objectives of the class, such as making and supporting an argument, conducting primary and secondary research, organizing or arranging materials, and even learning and using mechanic through editing. Multimodality is also presented as a pedagogical space that allows for the composing of linguistic and non-linguistic texts, building, making a composition using a range of materials and tools, and distributing that composition broadly to academic and non-academic publics. Orchard et al. 2024 provide two central barriers to access in the pedagogical development of multimodal projects that support the intersectional and interdependence critical framework. The first barrier is access, which the authors define as students owning or having convenient availability to technologies such as computers, software, and the internet. The authors note that access may also mean availability of the support structures to help use the technologies, be they online or in person. The research team then goes on to define accessibility as people with various physical, cognitive, mental, or emotional abilities can equitably participate and succeed in the activities, assignments, and interactions in the class. The authors propose the pedagogical intervention that they label the Open Media Platform, or OPM. This assignment structure is defined by students deciding which modalities and media to use based on their own technological access, expertise, abilities, and personal professional goals. Rather than these decisions being predetermined by the instructor and the same student, e.g., assigning a video or podcast project. An interesting aspect of the researcher's assignment scaffolding is the use of low-stakes media production, which are defined as activities utilized to introduce important ideas for the course and to begin integrating the ideas with various media-based methods. When thinking about the project 2 for my really it's my first year writing courses, so the first and second level of that writing trajectory, right? Usually writing 1 is students like their first semester or second semester of college, and then usually writing 2, they're taking it prior to the end of their second year, depending on the institution. Some students might be a little bit older or have retaken it a couple times. But the second part of the term is always trying to create an academic experience that's a little bit more open, yeah. And I think that's why I like film, because it can go in a lot of directions and you could make a lot of aesthetic decisions and creative decisions. One of the things that Orchard et al. Notes is that as educational spaces, including writing classes, are becoming more standardized and subject to top-down administration, multimodal composing itself emphasizes creativity in various forms while potentially still fulfilling more traditional objectives of the class. So as we've noted already, the digital script building into the digital short, that's an opportunity for us to take that dense academic discourse of the literature review, that language and literacy of college and professional world, of the academic world and professional world, and the scholarly process, and reformulate that into a film that's much more accessible, right? Because most people can't read peer-reviewed academic journal articles. If you're reading at a 7th, 8th grade level of literacy, it's going to be very difficult for you to engage a peer-reviewed academic journal article. And so when you're writing a literature review on that, many students are writing assignments that their own family members can't access that level of language and literacy. Yet when we turn it into a film, all of a sudden it's much more accessible, right? It's fluid because it could be transcribed into multiple languages, subtitles can be put into it, it could be paused, it could be rewinded, it could be slowed down, and so that information can be played back over and over again and with additional context so that the audience will eventually get that, even if they're not at that language and literacy level. Another aspect of Project 2, especially for my second level of writing, first year writing, is the completion of the video resume. And the video resume is taking all of the professional portfolio material. So taking, the CV, the resume, the cover letter, the job that they're, going through the motions or really applying for, their LinkedIn profile, and then it allows them to make a digital representation of who they are, but in a very professional context, right? So the digital short, it's much more of that academic and creative extension of the academic discourse that they've been developing within the course. The video resume is a professional representation of those digital skills, of that multimodal shift. And so the open media aspect of project two is, I think, a really important part of the course itself, because it takes the traditional practices of language and literacy and it reinterprets them within a very contemporary mode of communication. When you really think about how video screens proliferate themselves throughout our society, what they are learning to do is to compose within a very powerful form of information communication. And again, all you have to do is look at the demographic breakdown of who's on, TikTok or who's on Snapchat, or, everybody is on YouTube, right? Like all of these are driven through video-based digital media. And in that capacity, being able to make a short film or being able to create a video resume, you are writing within that medium, you are composing within that medium. And on top of that, with the case of the digital short, you're integrating your language and literacy skills from college directly. You're taking those language and literacy skills of academic discourse, using it to make a film. With the video resume, you're taking those professional skills that we are developing alongside that academic discourse and then putting it directly within the context of the professional world. And, in both of these projects, I'm not looking for perfection, and I'm certainly not, approaching it the same way as I do the traditional essay, because I think the way that I instruct project one is to really ground them in sort of the conventions and the strategies that all college writing is looking for. So there's a different level of responsibility. When you have to write an essay in a class that's not a writing class, oftentimes the professor has expectations, but they're not elucidating on what those expectations are. Whereas in a writing class, that's what we're trained to do. And so I want to make sure that when you leave here, you have a toolkit that prepares you to write at this academic level in any course, right? Whereas when we're making a film, when we're doing the video resume, that can be, again, they're fluid, they're multimodal, they have mobility. And in that context, they can go in a lot of different ways. You can apply to different jobs with a video resume. You can apply to internships, graduate school. The short film you can integrate as a creative component in a project in any course. So it's sort of like this opening of what they are doing. And again, I that's why I really like that idea of like the open media platform, right? The assignment structure as Orchard et al. Is noting, the assignment structure is defined by students deciding which modalities and media to use based on their own technological access, expertise, abilities, and personal professional goals. Universal Design for Learning Guidelines 2.0. Oswald 2015 provides an important critique of online writing courses, or OWC, in that they are not inherently accessible to students with physical disabilities and learning challenges. In response to this assertion, the authors propose a solution in the form of the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines 2.0. Additionally, the authors discuss the key accessibility barriers to disabled students in OWI, online writing instruction, proposes a disability and accessibility agenda for writing programs, and illustrates how educators can employ the OWI effective practices to move towards an inclusive and accessible pedagogy. Oswald 2015 argues that the point is not that online technology is a superior intervention for displaced and other place-bound students. Rather, their argument for accessible technologies regard the need to provide equitable educational tools to these populations so that they can have learning opportunities comparable to their non-disabled peers. The author's goal is to pull disability from the margins towards the center. This pedagogical approach begins with the CCC OWI Principle 1. Online writing instruction should be universally inclusive and accessible. A major benefit of this approach is that many of the issues affecting disabled students also affected other constituencies. In this sense, affordances provided by the flexibility and diversity of the disability-centered accessible pedagogy are equally beneficial for non-displaced students given various learning styles and approaches. Oswald 2015 lists a number of interventions. In terms of the presentation of information, providing alternative representations of auditory and visual information for students with visual, hearing, and learning disabilities, the use of straightforward language to state ideas, and make underlying structural features of abstract ideas explicit using concrete examples in different modalities. In terms of action and expression, OWI instructors should assure full access to learning technologies to students with disabilities and make navigation of tools accessible, make physical action possible through multiple options for interacting with technology, e.g. mouse, keyboard, head pointers, and the like, employ a variety of media for communication, give students options to compose in multiple media, and provide sufficient technical support. Finally, in terms of engagement, the authors write that OWI instructors should give students enough autonomy to make our curriculum their own, applying diverse techniques and methods of knowledge acquisition and interaction. Ultimately, for Oswald 2015, there are 3 specific categories of accessibility-related responsibilities in OWI: course delivery and student support infrastructure, course curriculum and content development, student-instructor interaction for content delivery, and further content generation in the form of participative learning. Learning Management Systems, or LMS. Conteo 2025 augments the UDL framework with the inclusion of the Social Model of Disability, or SMD. The authors argue that the theory complements UDL by shifting the focus from individual barriers that prevent full participation. The external focus is an important factor because, unlike the medical model, which views disability as deficiency to be treated or cured, the social model emphasizes that disability arises from the interaction between individuals and their environment. This perspective calls for the removal of barriers, whether physical, attitudinal, or systematic, that hinder individuals with disabilities from fully participating in society, including in educational settings. The authors argue that the inclusion of SMD means that institutions must ensure their learning environments are accessible to all students. Conteo 2025 presents several initiatives for OWI to integrate into their coursework that will support a more accessible LMS framework. The first recommendation is to approach the course from a proactive design integration, which implies moving away from a reactive approach to accessibility, where accommodations are provided only after barriers have been identified. The primary method to develop a proactive approach would be to embed accessibility into the design of all courses from the outset. UDL is presented as a primary approach because it provides a framework for this shift by promoting multiple means of representation, engagement, and expression in the course content. And by designing flexible and adaptable courses, educators can reduce the need for individual accommodations and ensure that all students have equal access to learning opportunities. This also means that LMS providers must continue to improve their platform's accessibility features. To enhance their features, the author notes that this should include ensuring compatibility with assistive technologies such as screen readers and voice recognition software, providing tools for captioning multimedia content, and offering alternative text for all images and visual elements. So for the final 2 ideas, the universal design for learning and the notion of the learning management system itself, these 2 really go together in terms of the course structure and design that I had envisioned. First and foremost, what we're thinking about is the idea that there is, and Oswald 2015 notes this, the idea that when we create accessibility and usability within our course, it provides affordances in terms of that flexibility and diversity of disability-centered accessible pedagogy, which are equally beneficial for non-disabled students given various learning styles and approaches. And what this does is allow us to kind of think about how we can create a framework that, again, and I think it kind of goes back to that original point, the idea of sort of like having that purpose-driven structure before you enter into things. The idea that you can have alternative forms of representation of auditory and visual information for students with visual, hearing, and learning disabilities. And in providing that, that also gives students who, one, come from cultures and backgrounds that don't want to talk about disability in any way, right? Or mental health for that capacity, right? But at the same time, they can come and enter into that space and get the advantages because it's pre-designed to think of those things, right? Or there are students that perhaps don't realize that they struggle in certain areas, and then having that more accessible course structure, they find sort of like a process and resources that do benefit them moving forward as well too. And then just the idea that everybody benefits from the use of straightforward language to state ideas and making underlining structural features of abstract ideas explicit using concrete examples and different modalities, right? Like whether I'm clearly making things laid out within an assignment guideline, within a lecture page, within an email announcement, within a video, ensuring that there's a consistency within that message, that it lines up with the work that's expected within that structure as well too. Everybody benefits from that. There's just sort of an overarching clarity. One of the things that's been interesting about doing a lot of or reading a lot of the disability and accessibility literature, especially the surveys on instructors, is the idea that it's usually a small percentage of that population, but a lot of just instructors feel like they just don't have that responsibility to meet students with disabilities, students with accessibility issues. They don't think that's their responsibility. And a lot of the surveys that or the data that I've kind of read through this experience, it just outright like that's up to either the student or the institution. And so I think that's one of the brilliant things about kind of having this as a structural approach from the outset, right? Is that now it's just becoming streamlined within the pedagogy, and that benefits again all students because everybody has the opportunity to enter into the information from different vantage points. And so not just from from the universal design framework, right, to target students with maybe visual issues or auditory issues or what have you, but also the idea of just supporting the broader learning experience as a whole, right? Like you're just sort of like enriching the educational environment as a whole. And ultimately, as Oswald 2015 writes, in terms of action and expression, OWI instructors should assure full access to learning technologies to students with disabilities and make navigation of tools accessible, make physical action possible through multiple options for interacting with technology, mouse, keyboard, head pointers, and the like, employ a variety of media for communication, give students options to compose in multimedia, and provide sufficient technical support. And again, that's sort of the last idea of the universal design, is that it's not just enough to say we're going to do a multimodal project, we're going to bring video composition skills into the academic discourse that you're developing, the professional portfolio that you're developing. We also want to help those skills emerge through specific behaviors and practices, right? So you can't just say, go make a video resume. And I certainly don't do that. And I certainly don't say, oh, just go make a short film. We break it down into its component pieces. And again, it's sort of like that principle of reverse engineering for any academic assignment, right? Like you start with the end goal, and then you itemize those incremental steps that build up to that end goal. And in the reverse engineering, you develop the structure of the module, right? So ensuring that there's a process to developing the script before you make the film for the digital short. And the same thing for the video resume. There is we do a brief little discussion post that, and in addition to the other writing, right, like the cover letter, the CV, the resume, the LinkedIn profile, they have all of that. And then when they're ready to turn on their phone and record themselves and introduce themselves to their potential employer, they have a lot of discursive material around them to help them enter into that. So again, it's really kind of thinking through that idea of technical support as well too, right? Obviously trying to make it accessible, multimodal, presented in a variety of different viewpoints. But on top of that, also remembering that there's a different component that's being added to this, right? Like they're not just writing on a word processor. Now they're integrating video editing in. They're integrating a camera, and they're considering things like audio and voice and all that. So making sure that they have all of those resources in the event that there is a hiccup or a misstep, that they can quickly correct themselves and then move forward within that process. And again, I think one of the things, especially about the principles of universal design of learning, is that within the modern educational context, the learning management system really does create a lot of opportunities for support. Not just in the integration of an accessibility checker, but that idea of having information in a lot of different ways, right? That idea of like, if you have a video, having software that can transcribe it and transcode it so that it can be put in different formats, things like that. That would be a lot to do if you're building a web page and then trying to integrate a lot of different softwares into that. Whereas with the learning management system, depending on what your course, or what your institution is investing their time and money in, you can really connect with a lot of applications and a lot of different resources. So for example, on the homepage of Canvas, one of the things that I'm able to do is early on in the term, first and foremost, encourage them to access the software that they get with their tuition, right? So, two of my universities that I teach at, they, as part of their tuition, they get access to Adobe Creative Cloud. They get access to Microsoft Office 365. So I can immediately point them in the direction of that technology. And then as the course unfolds, slowly support them with that. So, in terms of like Microsoft Office, helping them with MLA format and navigating that relationship with Canvas and Google Drive, things like that. And then when we're thinking about Adobe Creative Cloud, also thinking about, how, or for that matter, a lot of students have iMovie already on their electronic devices, connecting that technology to resources that aren't in the class as well too. So I have, the frequently asked questions, how-to walkthroughs for both of those softwares on the homepage of Canvas at the start of the term as well too. So it's a very, the learning management system becomes a very interactive space, depending on how interactive you want it to be, how much structure you want to provide within that experience, so that everyone can engage those dynamics within a lot of different ways, and certainly through multiple modalities, I think is one of the big ideas here.